something a little bit different. We wanted to get some views from pastors of different churches, thinking particularly about vision and how that links into the way that churches communicate. So we've got 3 separate interviews with some brilliant guests.
Yeah, so first you're going to be hearing from Josh Lees of Holy Trinity Boar Lane in Leeds. That's a city centre church with a focus on weekday outreach to city workers. Then we're going to have Oz Power, which is probably the best name for a pastor that you'll ever hear. Oz serves leading Barton Church in Canterbury. And then finally, we'll have Peter Baker, who is the senior minister at Lansdowne Church in Bournemouth, where listeners might remember that I worshipped for a decade and spent a couple of years on the staff team there.
Yeah. All 3 have some really brilliant, fresh insights into the real kind of nitty-gritty of church comms. I mean, honestly, we could spend all day talking about helpful strategies and tools, but ultimately each church is going to have its own vision for reaching out to the lost in their context and community. And so how they communicate is going to be an outworking of this.
Yeah, you're in for a real treat. So enjoy the episode. So welcome, Josh, to the podcast. We are going to start off with some quickfire questions off the bat, just to get the listener to know you a little bit. So first of all, what is your favourite biscuit?
My favourite biscuit is a hobnob.
Yes.
Chocolate hobnob, I'm hoping.
Yeah, I like to mix it up. So I mean, lots of different biscuits. Never in the same box as a ginger nut, obviously, but the first choice would be a chocolate hobnob. Yeah, for sure.
They are
nice.
The best.
And thinking about social media, do you have a favourite social media platform of choice?
Honest, I'm not massive on social media. My favourite, the one that I would sort of choose out of leisure, is Instagram. I like 80% of the stuff that I follow is like about memes and ridiculous like videos and fail videos and stuff. So I'm one of those like people who only really looks at memes and just constantly sends memes to friends who probably think, please stop sending me so many of these stupid things. So that's...
I feel that pain. No one ever says LinkedIn out of leisure, though, funnily enough.
No.
Which is how we met.
Yeah. I mean, LinkedIn, definitely, maybe we'll come on to this. From a church point of view, LinkedIn is like pretty much the only place that we're really giving our time to. But for memes, I mean, memes on LinkedIn are not as high.
It's not the place, no.
I like memeing LinkedIn. I think that's funny.
Yeah.
Any favourite podcasts that you tune into?
Do you know, I'm a really big fan of Comedy Bang Bang. I don't know if that's something you guys listen to, like improv.
Is that Reggie thingy?
There's lots of different comedians, lots of like SNL guys. I just realised like I don't tend to listen to enough like proper podcasts. I think life can feel really like intense sometimes, so I tend to listen to like lots of comedy and that sort of thing. But when I'm in a more serious mood, I do really like 10th Theology with Stephen Backhouse. If you've heard that one, it's really good podcast. And also Practicing the Way, I have a lot of time for that.
John Mark Comer.
That's for one. And then here in Leeds as well, where I'm based, we've got a few really good Leeds-based ones. Leeds School of Theology, Leeds Business Podcast, amongst others.
Cool. So final quickfire question, and it's the one that everyone dreads. Gourd or pomegranate?
I'm going to go pomegranates.
Solid choice. I just thought talking
everyone goes.
Yeah, random Instagram memes. I saw a video this morning which was the perfect recipe for handmade, like hand squeezed pomegranate juice, and I thought the algorithms got me down, obviously.
That is super niching down. So, does your church have a vision statement, and how did that come about?
Yeah, so we're here in Leeds, and the church is Holy Trinity Boar Lane, and the vision is to love and serve workers. There's been a church building here for donkey's years, I think, since the 1700s or something like that. But actually, don't quote me on that, because I should know this more than I do. Been in church here for a very long time, but the church has kind of gone through various different forms, and it was a few years ago that, to the credit of people in the city, I think there was a real kind of bravery in saying, do you know what, let's do something different here. Let's have a church that is focused on workers, Monday to Friday focus. And so that was kind of where this kind of vision began, to have a church that would reach out to people working in Leeds. And so that's really the heartbeat of what we're doing, and is at the core of each of the different things that we do.
And it might be a difficult question to answer, but how does your church's comms strategy fit within this wider vision?
Yeah. So because we're so focused on workers, we have really leaned into LinkedIn for our comms. LinkedIn being so like business focused. Like if you're on LinkedIn, you are thinking about work. Like no one is going to LinkedIn for memes or for like recipes or no celebrity gossip. Like if you are, you're going to be looking for a long time before you find anything. But if you're on LinkedIn, it's because you're thinking about work. So it felt like the natural place to start reaching out to people, start making connections. And we do have, Facebook and Instagram, and we found that, or are finding that, we have some followers on there, but like I think my like uncles and aunts and people like that are lovely people, but actually not the people that we're trying to reach. And we thought actually we could have, it's imaginable that we could have like quite a large following, but actually people who are not in Leeds, they're not workers. And so we found ourselves, as I say, leaning into LinkedIn. It's been really helpful too from an analytics point of view. We can be quite focused about inviting people who are from Leeds, and then the analytics it gives us back to show how many of our followers are from Leeds, work in Leeds, where they work, that sort of stuff. So we can see quite clearly not just how many people are following or engaging, but what percentage of those live in Leeds, work in Leeds. So that's been really helpful for us so far. And even actually just before we started recording, we had a lunchtime service today just now, and 4 of the people in the service had each come just from seeing it on LinkedIn. And I think it's been fun for us too, because you don't necessarily expect to see a church on LinkedIn. And we try very consciously to reach out to people who are not kind of church people. Like we're not kind of looking around under rocks trying to find kind of secret Christians, but we're saying actually no, like we are a church right in the middle of the city. And so we connect with a real range of people on there, of all faiths and none. And it's been really encouraging actually seeing some of the conversations and connections that have come from that.
That's really cool. And how long did you say that you've been doing that?
So we only started using LinkedIn 4 months ago.
Okay.
And I could tell you because I was looking at it this morning. I mean, it's not like we're not going to like break records for like the most amazing accounts or whatever. We've got 707 followers as of today, the 16th of July. And like 80% of those are people who work and live in Leeds. And then 20% is my extended aunt. So it's a massive family. But it's been really cool. And we've been pleasantly surprised actually, like to see that grow just in these last 4 months. And I kind of will keep an eye on it with interest over the next, year and beyond. And yeah, as I say, like with the people coming to the service today, we've kind of seen those kind of real life connections of people who are coming along to services and events and that sort of thing just through LinkedIn, which has been fun.
Awesome.
So you said you've got the other platforms as well. Do you think though that LinkedIn for the moment will be your priority in how you're sort of communicating with not just your church family but sort of beyond that? Do you think that's the priority solely?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think that's particularly because we are a workplace ministry, certainly the church. So I started in my role here in January, and the church I was part of prior, we didn't use LinkedIn at all. And I think it was right that we didn't. Was it right? I don't know, I'm doubting myself here, questioning myself. But for us, where we were before, it was all about Instagram and Facebook. And I suppose it depends a lot on the makeup of the people you're trying to reach, I guess.
So diving a little further into the LinkedIn strategy then, as you say, that's not something a lot of churches will necessarily have as their focus. So you mentioned that most of the people are location based, so they're within Leeds where you are, but even then you're trying to target a range of people. So in order to do this, what does your strategy look like? Like, what sort of things are you posting? Are you having to do like a variety of content, or is it mostly sort of plugging events you've got going on? What does that look like?
Yeah. Honestly, I feel like a real fraud having this conversation on one level, because even to say strategy it feels so grandiose, because it's very like ad hoc, and I think the team here would be laughing if they were in the room. So I'm glad they're not. But I mean, honestly, I've worked this out. I've worked out that you can add 100 people a week on LinkedIn before it says, "You're crazy, stop adding." And you can add people based on location. So
sure.
I grew up fairly close to Leeds, but haven't lived here since I was like 18, and my hairline was like an inch below where it is now. And so I was like, right, I know about 6 people in the whole city. Where do I begin? And so I literally was like, LinkedIn, search people who work in Leeds. And literally, I know this sounds a bit crazy and a little bit weird, but I just started adding people. And then people who accepted, I would send a message, and I actually have the message here. It just says, "Hi, insert name here. It's great connecting with you. I'm fairly new to Leeds and my role at Holy Trinity Ball Lane, the church by the Trinity Centre. Really glad to connect with folk in the city, learn more about what's happening in Leeds. Always up for a coffee. Feel free to be in touch anytime." And I've been amazed at how many people replied to that. I wouldn't want to like guess and get it horribly wrong, but I've had so many conversations and meetings with people off the back of that, and people who I never thought would reply. The chief exec of the council, sports players, CEOs, right through to 0 hours contracts, retail, like the whole shebang. And so often those conversations have been with people who have then connected with others as well. And I think I've been like really pleasantly surprised to be here like a few months later. And I don't actually do that with the same kind of level of like weirdness right now. Like I haven't done that for a while actually, but I think just starting out especially, like it was really, as a platform, it was really helpful just to be able to say, right, I'm brand new in this city, I don't know people. And I think sometimes when you're new, like it actually gives you, it's a real gift sometimes. You can afford to be a bit goofy, which is my specialty, and it gets less and less endearing as time goes on and more annoying. But in the first few months of a role, just to be like, hey, I'm brand new, I don't know anything, like why don't we chat? Which maybe you can't do when you've been somewhere for like 20 years. That's been kind of our I'll use it, but it feels wrong to. But it's been our strategy so far. In terms of content, it's been very like trial and error. It won't surprise you that our most engaged posts have been about my dog. We've done a real mixture. I think we've been like pleasantly surprised. I think so. I brought my dog in one day, and I kind of even like jokingly said like, "Oh, like pets in therapy, dog in training," or something like that. And I was just really like, I think I got like 10,000 something like that. And loads of people followed off the back of that, and people messaged, and so much so that we did actually then get him trained as a pets as therapy dog. And that's
amazing.
Taken on our website, because we're like, oh,
full circle.
This is like a real thing.
Yeah.
So we've had a lot of that. I mean, broadly speaking, like our videos are the most popular engagement. We do a little bit of like just straight to camera, unedited, very unglamorous, but just saying, hey, like this is what's happening. And then for events, we mainly just do stuff on Canva. Like I think for designers who engage with this podcast, if they looked at it, they'd probably scoff and say, "This is shocking." But it's where we are right now. I must say, we do also have a really brilliant designer. We're fortunate. We're kind of sister church with St George's in Leeds, and at St George's we do have a fantastic designer, and he probably is wary to pick up the call when I'm calling, because I'm like, "Hey, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this?"
When you need it for yesterday, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of like, where there's not capacity, that's when we lean into Canva. But yeah.
Cool. I mean, I want to dive just a little bit further into what you call the silly sort of outreach of connecting with people, because I think that's quite back to front in terms of how we often think about social media. And right. I think definitely with LinkedIn, that's something where that is generally the way that it's done a bit more anyway if you're promoting a business. But if you were trying to do that with Facebook, you know, if you're just trying to reach out to randomers in your location, that can be seen as really weird. And I wonder, obviously you are the vicar of the church there, but it seems that in some ways your role is kind of more akin to like a chaplain, especially, you know, when talking about like businesses and sports people and all that sort of thing. So maybe that gives a bit more permission to do it. But do you think that this is something that we can apply to other contexts that aren't necessarily sort of city church or sort of business people focused churches? Of how can we apply that strategy? Because whilst it's back to front for social media, actually it's so people first, and actually is quite Christ-like if you look at a lot of his ministry as well.
Yeah, I hadn't actually really thought about it that way, but I guess what we're doing is we're trying to have the connection first, and then content kind of comes second, rather than like make content and then put it before people. Yeah, I suppose actually it's something that we did as well, where it was previously when with our social media account, just on Instagram and stuff, we literally like walked around the parish, and like every business we saw, we followed them on like every channel they had, which meant we were following some pretty like controversial places, actually, the sort of things that a lot of people would be like, why is the church following that? We were like, in the parish, we're gonna follow them, we're gonna connect with them, and then especially on platforms where it kind of is like a two-way thing, so like LinkedIn or Facebook, if you're connecting with someone rather than just following, that connection we found was like permission to like have a conversation. And certainly with LinkedIn, even, you know, the message that we'll send is not, even at that point, we're not really pushing anything, but we're just saying like, hi, here we are, we would like to connect with you, but kind of giving permission to the other person, I guess, rather than us saying, great, you connected, we're in now, we're going to spam you, all of this is happening, sign up here, pay here, give us money here, all of that stuff. But I suppose, we've just tried to kind of think about what does it look like for us to just walk the parish in a digital sense. I was kind of given the advice when I got ordained, they said, put your dog collar on and just walk around. Yeah. And that was such sound advice. And I suppose we've tried to think, what does that look like for us in terms of social media? Like when we have a very specific regional kind of focus, we are so focused on Leeds with our church. And so what does it look like for us to engage in a very specific way with Leeds-based businesses? And so, I suppose, hopefully there's something in that might be helpful for transferable in other settings as well. But certainly, like following every single business, like in every single company. If you've got there was an office block that had like 6 or 7 different businesses, and I think we were surprised too previously what came from that. So we followed an estate agent. We were in West Kensington, and we had this big promotion at the time of like Love West Ken. That was our big like kind of community push, and they just wrote back like, oh, like we love West Ken too, and we're like, oh great, well. And then kind of began this kind of conversation, and in the end they ended up like sponsoring our whole like community church day. We had no money, and they paid for like all the promotion for that.
Amazing.
We ended up paying for like when we did like our Christmas. They weren't Christian, like none of them were professing Christians, but
No.
when we did our like carols by candlelight, big kind of concerts and stuff, they paid for us to get a designer to do our booklets, and they paid to get all the booklets printed and all this stuff. And like we'd never in a million years would have thought, oh, we should approach estate agents in our community to see if they'll fund our ministry. But that was kind of one of the joys and fruits of trying to live locally on this like international platform, I guess.
I'm making a note of that one.
There's some good stuff in there. So you've kind of answered this to an extent already, and I think actually you've also combated it. But are you finding that there are any key challenges with reaching people today?
I mean, I think one of the things we're finding is it's just so loud. Like there's so many people wanting to sell stuff and push stuff, and I think what ministry in previous times had was you knock on a door and talk to someone, and there wasn't so much volume around stuff that people were being kind of forced to consume in terms of whether it's just billboards or ads on social media or that sort of thing. So it feels so noisy, and I suppose as churches we're offering something that's countercultural, so to try and share what's happening in our faith communities and ultimately to share our faith in a really noisy environment. I guess that's the challenge for us all, recognizing that sometimes the noise is the problem. Like when there's so much going on for some people and they're just totally overwhelmed with stuff, like what are we saying to that? And so I suppose that's been a big challenge for us. I think what we've tried to own in our kind of like social media stuff is that we do lead with that we're a church. Like we're quite unapologetic about that, and I think in a way like it's actually been quite a helpful way of connecting with the people who would like to connect with us, because I'm not under the illusion that like everyone responds and says yes, or like, oh brilliant, like a vicar's messaged me on LinkedIn, this is exactly what I was wanting to happen.
It's made my day.
Yeah, I mean for sure, like most people don't write back, and that's fine. I think being really comfortable with rejection is part of being a Christian. I think like it's part of certainly like outreach and sharing faith, and I think for us that's I wouldn't put it as a challenge, I guess, but I just want to name it because I think it's something that we're aware of. Like when we do stuff on LinkedIn, I actually find LinkedIn is like a much friendlier platform than say like Twitter or Instagram to a point. Like I feel like there are fewer trolls on LinkedIn. Like they exist.
Yeah. But people's business reputation is potentially at stake. They don't want to be called out on LinkedIn. They're in that different mode, aren't they?
Yeah, you're not going to like slag someone off knowing that as soon as someone clicks on your profile it says where you work and your job title. Whereas, if there is more kind of freedom to be anonymous on other platforms, I guess.
A bit of a different question. How easy are you finding it to recruit volunteers for serving at the moment, for both sort of your comms and for like wider ministry within the church?
Yeah, I mean, serving here, because we're so workplace focused, we're really conscious that most people join us on their lunch break, they join us before work. And so we try to keep that in mind. Anytime we're asking someone to do something, we're thinking, right, this is you giving up your lunch break. And so I guess we try and, not that we, don't ask people to volunteer, like far from it, but we recognize that each of our capacities is slightly different. And I suppose as well, like the kind of heartbeat of what we're doing is to support workers, and so it's very much about helping people to live out their faith in their work alongside being with us together. I mean, one of the things I mentioned about, connecting people to our LinkedIn page. One of the things we've put to people in our congregation is like, hey, like just use this, or even like just engage with it. Like when you see posts, like comment on them, share them. Like that's, I guess it doesn't really feel like kind of typical like volunteering stuff, but in terms of our comms has been really helpful. And of course, as people are sharing different pages and posts, they're not just sharing that with the people they work with, but they're sharing it with their customers and their clients. And so I think there's been a real kind of vulnerability almost from some people to just be like, you know what? Yeah, I will share this. But in doing so, they're sharing something of themselves in terms of their beliefs and their lives. And so yeah, that's been really cool. I think trying to think about ways that people can engage that are going to be, possible alongside busy work schedules and that sort of thing.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And I think we found that with the Christian business group as well, is that like some people are really happy to engage. For some people, it definitely takes time and it's a consideration, because in a sense that they're outing themselves as a Christian on their professional platform, which they may not have done before. And yeah, that's really interesting. Could you share any specific encouragements from sort of your digital or comms strategy or outreach?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn, as I say, being a kind of most encouraging piece, I think one of the things that we've been really pleasantly surprised at, as I say, is who's connected with us. So we're from September, we're starting some like monthly business breakfast events, like networking events in the city. And we thought, you know what, like let's just like write up our like dream list of people that we'd love to speak at this event, add them all on LinkedIn, and ask if they'll do this for no money at all, because that's how much money we've got. And we were so we've just been so encouraged. So when we start in September, we have the chief exec of the city council. The month after, we've got the chair of Betty's and Taylor's and Yorkshire Tea. We try and keep this very like Yorkshire focused. We've got a Leeds Rhinos legend like coming after that. Rugby is like everything here. The Lord Mayor after that, and all of those connections have just come through like cold calling on LinkedIn. And so for us, that's been a real kind of encouragement that literally just with a kind of standard LinkedIn account and some cold call messages on there, that's led to this lineup of people who were all on our kind of like dream list.
Yeah.
Of like people that we thought, gosh, how are we going to connect with these people? And I think often as well on LinkedIn, like you tend to go like straight to that person. Like often if you email, you go through to someone's assistant or whatever else. And it feels like sometimes social media channels kind of strip back the layers a bit, and you can just get to the person you're trying to talk to. So that's been a real encouragement to us. And I think also like people coming along to services and joining in who have just seen it online. As I say, today like 4 people had come along to a lunchtime service, just seen it on LinkedIn, different people, and so that's really encouraging. It's like that sort of digital shop front, I guess.
Yeah, hugely. There's churches out there that would kill to have 4 people come in just off the back of like social media.
Sure.
I think it's really interesting as well that people are showing that they're willing to respond really positively when you're reaching out directly. And I do wonder as well how much just leading with a church, I'm a vicar, actually opens those doors in a way that if I reach out to people on LinkedIn, they go, oh, he's a web designer, clearly he's just trying to sell me a website. Like it's almost as if you're not trying to sell anything, whilst actually you've got the greatest news to share with people.
Yeah, I do think that every role will open and close doors for people. And I find it particularly like if I don't wear my dog collar that often because it's dead uncomfortable rather than anything else. But when I do wear it, like people will talk to me who wouldn't otherwise. But the opposite is also true. And although that's about a uniform, that I think extends to the jobs we have, the roles we have. People will talk to you who wouldn't want to talk to me, and each role will open and shut doors. And I think rather than wishing we had different roles or different job titles or whatever, I think it's just trying to lean into that and just say, okay, well, actually, the best version of me is a confident me, and to just be, I think it links back to what, when we were talking earlier about being comfortable with rejection and to put yourself out, online or in person. Like, the more we do that, the more we kind of open ourselves up to possible rejection, and just kind of making peace with that and just thinking like, yeah, I'm willing to have an online strategy, or I'm willing to post this for no one to like this or engage with it or it to go well, or whatever it is, or I'm willing to write to this person and they don't get back to me, and that's not going to rock my confidence or whatever. It has an impact. So to be honest about it, but just to be kind of conscious about it, I guess.
Oh, that's some really, really valuable stuff, but also really interesting, because I can't particularly think of another church that is focusing primarily on LinkedIn, but understanding the context of their community, and both church community but also actually within the area geographical community. So that's been fascinating to hear more about it. So thank you so much for sharing with us today, Josh. Really, really appreciate it. Where can people find you and the church online? Yeah,
so LinkedIn, we're Holy Trinity Boar Lane. Our website is holytrinityboarlane.org, and we're on other platforms as well, but as I say, so primarily LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Great to connect with people. Yeah, give it a follow. Be great to connect with folk on there.
So we are going to be speaking to Oz, and so to start with, we are going to ask a few very important questions. I always say it's the most important. It is. What is your favourite biscuit?
Oh, that is an important one. Definitely, without hesitation, a chocolate hobnob for me.
Yes. I think that is the resounding favourite of most of our guests. So I'm very happy with that, because that's one of my favourites as well. What is your favourite social platform for sort of personal use rather than specifically ministry and church?
I'd probably say Twitter or X. I don't really use the other platforms much at all, and I find that there's obviously a variety of good content on there, but some bad stuff. But yeah, the stuff I engage with is pretty good.
Super cool. And do you have any favourite podcasts? Any that you kind of listen to no matter what? Any recommendations? Any new finds?
Yeah, I just checked my podcast app to see what I've recently been listening to. I like the Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God by Justin Brierley. I think that's excellent. Really well put together, produced some really fascinating episodes there, so I'd recommend that. I like Speak Life and stuff that Glenn Scrivener does. So again, another call out there. And then the other things that I tend to listen to, maybe a bit of John Mark Comer, his teaching podcast, and the You're Not Crazy stuff that Sam Albury and Ray Ortland have produced.
That's a great podcast.
So there's a bit of variety for pastors, outreach evangelism, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's the first shout out that we've had for You're Not Crazy. That's really great podcast there.
Yeah, good. Yeah, they do really helpful stuff. So I'm looking forward to the new season. Yeah.
Super, excellent. And finally, gourd or pomegranate?
Well, I'll be honest, gourd isn't a word that I regularly use. I even had to Google search it to double check. Pomegranate is going to have to be, because I've eaten that. I've probably eaten gourds, but I'm less confident in being able to describe what they are.
That's
Excellent.
all right, you're not the first.
Thank you so much.
So, getting started then with the proper questions, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are now, and sort of how you've got there?
Sure. I'm married, got 3 kids, and have been living in Canterbury with my family for about 12 years now. So I'm the pastor of Barton Church and have enjoyed ministering with a staff team and elders over the last 12 years. It's changed quite a lot in the time that I've been there. Prior to that, I was a PE teacher in Hertfordshire, And I kind of came into pastoral work off the back of some teaching experience. And as much as I used to love teaching PE and sports, I love teaching the Bible even more and being involved in, more direct ministry day by day, week by week. So that's me and where I'm based at the moment in Canterbury. And we're a church with 2 sites, one that meets in the morning in Canterbury at 10:30 and one that meets in the afternoon at 4 p.m. in Faversham. So, it's great. Good stuff.
And what sort of church are you? I know it's always a difficult question to answer because it always feels loaded.
Yeah, totally. Well, we're an independent evangelical church. We're affiliated with the FIEC. And, being in Canterbury, we're quite contemporary. Lots of young families, lots of teenagers, some students and younger people as well as the whole age range, really. In our Faversham congregation, it's primarily younger families. It's a town where you won't have maybe so many students and young professionals, but you do have a lot of families. It's a great place to raise a family. So smaller congregation in the afternoon, about 40 or 50. And then in the morning in Canterbury, we're about 200.
Nice. So we're thinking today, as much as we're primarily a communications focused podcast, we're thinking about the link between the comms and the vision of a church. So does Barton have a vision statement as such, and how have you developed your vision?
Yeah, great question. I think vision's so important for any church organisation. Otherwise, you end up just reacting to what's going on around you. So we want to be proactive in sharing and partnering in God's mission. And so our strapline for the last, 6 or 7 years, has been transforming lives, communities, and culture. And every 3 or 4 years, we zoom in on an aspect of that particularly. So that's been our logo, our strapline, but we've devised a vision statement and a vision booklet actually over recent years to help us really understand what that means. So it's taken a few new guises after various years, but at first we did a lot of talking, praying as elders and staff team. We invited the church to kind of speak into that as well. And then we set up a clear vision and direction, which was a 2020 vision. I think that was the first one we did. So that was around 2015, 2016, with a view of, right, for the next 5 years, where do we want to go? And one of the things that we felt we wanted to do was become a multi-site church. We were a growing congregation in Canterbury. And so within the 5-year period, we launched our first site, which is in Faversham. So it's a form of church planting, one leadership, one kind of vision, one budget, resources, and that kind of approach. But great to do outreach and evangelism, discipleship in a different space to Canterbury. So that was the birth of that first real phase of the vision. And then I think we've had 2 other visions since then within that big strapline. And the most recent one is focusing on how we both stand firm on truth and yet are a community full of grace. We felt that was quite a pressing theme to teach on, to seek to grow in as a church community in our current context. So again, we did like a church survey, got information from people, and then again, a combination of where are we at this time and what's the nature of Barton Church? What does it look like for us to be doing God's mission, where we are in this time, who we are with the gifts, the opportunities, the abilities that God's given us. So, we spell out a clear vision and then some missional priorities, we call them. And so one of ours is the next generation. And a part of that is wanting to really invest in kids and youth. Another aspect is mentor disciples. So we want to invest in and prioritize people, your regular churchgoer having a mentor, being discipled, growing in faith. And then another aspect, I think, was to do with local mission and global mission and how we're seeking to live out as whole life disciples in those spaces. So we've kind of had a main vision and then a bit of a focus for a few years with some clear strategy that seeks to hopefully achieve that.
Yeah, that's really cool.
That's really sort of, I would say, not detailed, but that's really focused. And that must be kind of really helpful when sort of working out what to do. So thinking about...
I'll just add, sorry, that sometimes it sounds better than it is. The amount of times you go, oh man, like for example, our mentoring focus, we launched that 18 months ago, and it's only this coming autumn that we've got a mentor training workshop, having almost shared the vision, casted the vision, to actually seeing it outworked just takes time. And all that. Yeah. Thanks.
But it's exciting to hear that you've got them. So if we think about sort of those main visions, if we focus on sort of how that looks at then your communication, so how do you translate that across? How does that work for you in being able to translate that to both your kind of internal community but also externally?
Yeah, I think we've certainly not made it in this area, but we've tried different things. So a while back we talked quite a lot, and this is our general approach, is to have multiple methods of communicating rather than just one or two. And we recognise that some people love to read an email to find out information, other people engage via social media, other people prefer word of mouth and in the moment conversations. So depending on what we're trying to communicate, we'll use the right platform. But in terms of communicating the vision, through preaching, through our members' meetings, which we call church forums, through our different leadership groups. So we have a staff team as well as elders. We have life group leaders for our midweek and team leaders. So we want to inspire and communicate the vision to them, and then that kind of drip down through to their teams that they lead. And so multiple methods of trying to say, this is what we're about. How can each team area, be that youth or kids or an evangelism team, what is the main goal that you have? And that fits within the vision. And then if you've got a main goal within your kids, youth or evangelism team, how are you going to achieve that? So we try and help our team leaders to lead with vision as well in their teams. And then that kind of becomes part of the culture of the church. So I think the vision has sought to be communicated like that, but as well as maybe through team leaders and the big kind of services, through testimonies, stories of lives being transformed, and using the language of vision in testimony, in baptisms, and in mission trips, and in new projects, and anything that we start, does it fit with the vision? And so we're trying to communicate constantly around that theme. And so we've used loads of different platforms for that, from short videos where we have testimonies of stories of what God's doing, to social media content. And at the moment we're trying to make that more consistent. It's been quite hit and miss. That'd probably be an area of development for us at the moment. So yeah, we use all the regular stuff most churches use, I guess: email, WhatsApp, social media, telling stories in person, and trying to create that culture of talking about what God is doing, and therefore that leading. And I think I remember hearing from somewhere, I can't remember the source, but the importance of, in communication, we're sharing information, we're also wanting to inspire people, but we're also wanting to invite people. And so which of those three are we trying to do it with any communication? Is it information for church members about a meeting that's coming up? Is it inspiring people about what God's doing through our Christianity Explored? Is it inviting the wider community into church for a fun day? And looking at it like that has helped me think, oh wow, communication's a big deal. It's critical for mission.
Yeah. And I think, I might be wrong here, but I have a feeling that the BBC, when it was founded, was like educate, entertain, inform. And okay, they've not quite got the invite there, but it's interesting to me that so long ago they'd sort of picked those things out, and yet they're still so relevant today, even though the way that we do them has changed completely.
Yeah, that's a good point, definitely. Yeah.
So, I mean, you mentioned lots of things there, and I think that allowing people to lead with the vision and sort of having to be brought into the vision to do that, but then letting them do their part of it is really interesting. And then saying, we've got all these stories, we've got the different things that all the ministries want to communicate across all of these different platforms. How have you found is there any way that you found as helpful of bringing those things together? I mean, that's a lot of stuff to manage, even just tasks, let alone people.
Yeah, and I think the danger is it either happens purely centrally or only at grassroots level, and we need both. So as a church office team, we have an administrator, and she, along with our media and tech guy, cover some of the different communication bases. So they centrally have a bit of a plan about how to communicate on, be that a weekly basis or daily or monthly. And so most communication we try and control centrally with a good graphic, with our branding, with a clear, correct information. But we know that actually that won't be the only method, that the kind of best attempt is to provide content for church members to share on WhatsApp. So whilst we kind of try and manage that centrally and not overloading people, but having enough to show what's going on and doing what we need to do, we also want a grassroots level, a kind of church, organic church, the community, inviting people, using stuff that we pass on to them that's really usable. So yeah, one practical thing that we do, we have a weekly staff meeting, and on the agenda is communication. And so my question to the staff every week is, what does Hannah need to know for the weekly email? What social media is happening this week? Is our website up to date? So the practical tasks are kind of touched on week by week. And then once a term, we have a term planning. Okay, what's coming up this term? What have we got a 2-month run-in to organise it? Have we got a 6-week run-in to do the social media graphics? All that kind of stuff. So it's a part of the planning, basically, of our staff team.
See, I find this so interesting, Oz, because when I reached out and said, do you want to come on the podcast? You said, we're not very good at that. And yet, the things you're describing, the organisation,
better than most.
It's so far ahead of a lot of people. And that's not because they're difficult or complicated things, but just communicating with each other and arranging those meetings so that you can be, 6 weeks ahead is something that a lot of churches could only dream of, right?
Sure. Yeah, I think... Yeah, leaders differ, don't they? One of my areas, I guess, I've always been passionate about is being well organised, like the Nehemiah type leader. Like, actually, that's a way of loving the congregation. Can we be organised? And most of our congregation members are working in, hopefully, jobs and professions that organisation matters. There's structure. Let's bring some of that into the church, the good that it brings. Communicating well, clearly, in advance. Otherwise, the bottom line is its mission will be less effective because people are away the weekend. You've got a major family fun day or whatever. So yeah, we try. I do feel like we're certainly with the social media. We've tried a few different things and we've not been consistent. So that's a big area we want to improve and develop if we can. But,
Yeah.
It's brilliant. And I think it's at least you're acknowledging that it is an area to work on rather than just dismissing it, because very often it's just like, we don't have time, we're not even going to think about it. But yeah. So you mentioned some of your team members for admin and tech. Overall, within the church, how easy do you find it to recruit for volunteers to serve? Are some easier to find than others, but also actually do people feel a bit overwhelmed when trying to think, can I commit to this?
Yeah, I think this is always a challenge for most churches. Typically there's lots of people doing or a few people doing a lot of things rather than everyone evenly distributing the tasks. And I think since COVID it's been harder. I think that was a voiced expression by many church leaders. People have been a bit more cautious about getting committed to any specific task and responsibility. I feel like we've broken through that now, and the last year there's been quite a shift. So yeah, I think it's quite easy.
I know that everyone listening will go, okay, that's amazing. How?
Well, I know, and I think I've got 2 or 3 teams. I'm thinking, oh, it'd be great to have more on that team. It'd be great. But basically, we've taken a slow approach of rebuilding what we had before COVID. And now we're getting back to the number of teams that are good teams that, you know, most churches would have. But there are still gaps. And so we've tried to, I guess, where the teams are a bit short, we've tried to help the church realise the impact by going, right, it's parent-led creche this week. Rather than the same people will do it again and find themselves drained and feeling a bit bitter about being on creation, missing the sermon and worship time again. Or we'll actually start with just one person on our pack down team and encourage from the front a culture of helpfulness. Can you stack some chairs, tidy away some cups? And suddenly there's a culture developing rather than just, it's the 2 or 3 people on team.
Yeah.
So we've tried to do that rather than just make people feel guilty. But yeah, like in any church, there are a number of teams that would love a few more female leaders, a few more able people to help. And I think that's just an ongoing challenge because people are really busy and life is full on and non-stop. And on the one hand, we're talking about rest and the importance of not burning out and healthy rhythms through our teaching, preaching, discipleship. The other hand, we're like, but we want to do this. We want to start this. Come on, we need more people serving coffee or whatever it is. So we're kind of in an okay place. Be great to have more people doing more things, but again, that culture of helpfulness, or we're all going to be involved in pastoral work, not just the pastoral team. Kind of emphasis is one way that we've tried to address it a bit.
So we've mentioned in the past when chatting that you guys use a church management system called Church Suite. Can you tell us a little bit about how you use that and how that's helped you?
The way that we primarily use it is storing information so that people can find the address of a church member that they can go and visit or drop a meal round to. So it's got that kind of level of membership information. And for rotas, teams. So each of our team leaders or our staff that run teams organise their teams through the rotas that you can create on Church Suite. So all the information is on one app, which means communication, organisation. You can put dates you're away in so that your team leader can make sure that you're not placed on a Sunday that you're away, that kind of thing. So that system's really good. They're the 2 prime ways we use it. We put our events on there as well with some graphics. The main issue, I think key staff and some team leaders see the benefit and the opportunity to do so much more with it. But most members, it's just another app. It's a bit of a barrier. How do we use it? Well, so we're probably only using a slice of what we could with Church Suite, but that'd be the main.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful. And I asked that because the culture of getting people to serve is one thing, and the structure of then how you organise that is another, and they're both important. I think the culture is so much more important. You know, we could definitely do it without these systems, but it just helps us to actually organise these things and make sure that they actually happen.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. And so normally the half term before the new term, try and get team rotas done for the next term so that we've got a month or 2 swapping, reorganising. So we're organised. We're ready for what's ahead. So before the summer break, I was saying to the staff team, get your rotas started. Let's get ourselves set. So come September, we're good to go, and it's a busy month. That kind of approach.
Yeah. Thinking back to trying to communicate with people and considering the challenges that you can have with reaching people today, have you found that you've had to adapt the way that you are reaching out to people? I guess that goes both for internal and externally, because people are consuming content differently. Definitely.
So I think, again, like many churches, we really had to learn quickly during COVID to get good with video. And after the first 3 months of discovering that certainly isn't my gifting, attempting to do live streaming from my study on my MacBook, which I managed. Sometimes it was on mute, other times, it just was bad quality. We appointed a media and tech guy who really has helped us with that kind of skill and ability. So we learnt a lot during that period, and we've tried to use that moving forward. So we don't live stream our services anymore, but we don't just put an audio recording on our website of the sermons. We have a video, and that's on YouTube. So we've created a YouTube account, and obviously that's been a massive benefit to our community, but also for others outside of Barton. And then also on podcast apps, be that Spotify or other platforms. So that's been one big change over the last few years. The other way we've tried to communicate is through podcasts, a bit like this. And so we created, I think 3 years ago, a podcast, and we've done about 60 episodes in the last 3 years on discipleship, leadership, theology, that kind of stuff, and we've involved different members of the church in that and speaking on their passions and interests. So that's been another way for discipleship, mainly in-house. And then outside of church, we've tried to do things like Facebook boosts if we've got a fun day, or using social media platforms that we might not use, but we're aware most people probably do in society. So we're just talking at the moment about starting a TikTok social media platform as well from September. I know nothing about that. My daughter is asking to get TikTok. She hasn't got it yet. But
you and every other parent in the land.
Exactly. So we're thinking, even though most of our congregation don't use TikTok, lots of people do that aren't believers. So is this a missed opportunity if we don't?
Is that something that you specifically have asked your congregation and said, like, can we have a hands up, or like who's on TikTok, or is it just a feeling?
It's just a feeling.
Yeah,
we haven't asked. It's just been a staff team discussion and let's try this, really.
Yeah.
We do surveys occasionally, every couple of years, not too regularly, but every couple of years, and we get a load of feedback, and then try and make decisions in the light of it. But sometimes that's a bit painful, so I don't get it too much.
Yeah, no, 100%. I wonder whether just asking the one question and having like a micro survey, because I found this recently. I mean, we've talked about inviting to events and how one-to-one invites are so much more effective, because actually sometimes getting a no is just as helpful and it keeps the conversation going. And I think if you're just asking one question, it doesn't ask much of people. It's not like a 10-minute survey that you've got to fill out, but it also gives you something you can straight away take that action, rather than like other surveys that I've done recently where I've got 20 questions full of amazingly helpful responses, but you go, I don't know where to start in actually putting this into action now.
Yeah, that's a great, and I think be that WhatsApp polls or other platforms of doing quick engages the church, and then if you're doing something off the back of it, sounds great. Yeah, good idea.
Yeah.
So kind of, I always feel like this is a really like downer question, but what do you think the challenges are with reaching people? So it's really exciting to try these platforms, but what are the challenges with communicating?
I think there can be a lot of effort that goes into creating good content, a video, a graphic, and then sometimes you just don't know how it lands. We're not sure, are we, whether, and quite often at events, maybe church turn up with one or two people bringing a friend, but otherwise sometimes it feels like it's quite hard out there, because there's so much content that is being pushed out on all these platforms. How can we as a small, medium-sized church really engage and get people's attention about the good news that we want to share? So I think that can be hard. Sometimes we communicate, but there's no feedback, even from our members. Sometimes you feel like, has anyone heard? Is anyone going to say anything positive and encourage us? And then when you do get something, it's gold, isn't it? It's amazing, and can be a real encouragement. But I think that's one thing. Yeah, and the other is sometimes maybe as we trying to put stuff out there, it might be get a hostile reaction. So some of the more recent Facebook questions or comments that we've had have been, are we LGBTQ plus affirming? And basically that's the leading question, and we'll cancel you as a church if you can't support our position on this type of area. So I think there's a slight we're in quite a hostile social media world at the moment, with cancelling of people and organisations. how do we engage with that helpfully, clearly, and in truth?
To bring that around into, like, are there any positive things that you've to bring that around then, are there any positive examples that you can share from sort of recent times, whether it's social media or otherwise, as ways that you've had good stories or connections that have come out of the way that the church is communicating?
Some people have come to Barton because of looking at the website and saying it was simple, it was clear, and we feel like you're a community, and I've arrived and I've experienced one Sunday and I can tell that's the case, and that's wonderful. There's this link between this platform that we've put time and money into and then also an experience in person, so it's not, well, you're totally different. So that's I've had a few people say that
the authenticity is kind of paying off there.
Exactly. So that's been encouraging, and then sometimes I've met people at conferences or other things, said, I watched one of your sermons. You won't know me, but I was at Barton 25 years ago, and I wanted to check in on your Vision Sunday and see what your vision was as a church. And it's great you're still going for Jesus and the gospel. So I think the blessing of YouTube in that regard, and be that a website or whatever, those kind of things can encourage a church leader, a church team that put time and energy into it. And sometimes people come along, don't they, that are seekers, that don't know Jesus, that where are they going to look? I think it was Phil Knox from the Evangelical Alliance did a podcast recently I listened to, and he likened the missional house to how we do outreach, and the foyer of this missional house is social media and our online presence. And so we need to welcome people into our house, and that starts online. So kind of things like that are a good reminder that that's where people are. Let's engage with them, and there will be encouragements. Yeah,
and it's like we've quoted before, the church's front door is now in people's buckets.
Exactly,
is the way in. Yeah. I think also, just to touch on what you mentioned earlier about, like, with the podcast, or whether that's through other ways, that using communications as a way of pastoring and mentoring people, and sort of taking care of your flock, as well as outreach, because I think we can sometimes forget and just focus on the outreach rather than the internal and the discipleship.
Actually, that reminds me of one area that I think we've struggled to know how to do well, which is the in-house pastoral news. Wedding, funeral, baptism, someone getting a job, someone's health. All these areas often come through our midweek life groups, but if you're not in that life group, how do you hear? And it's really hard to share that when you're a larger congregation, just through a weekly
especially in multiple locations.
Exactly. So we find in our Faversham site that happens on a WhatsApp. Everyone almost knows everything. It's great, but that could never happen when you've got several hundred people. So people have said, we're not very good at sharing family news. How do we do that? And we're beginning to try and do that in a way that's more helpful. But one thing we've started is, so prayer meetings are hard for people to get to often. And I've been kind of plagued with, how do we really, can we add another program, another prayer meeting, an event? Actually, what if it's news for prayer for people instead? So just a monthly prayer sheet newsletter that people can read in their own time. And one of the points is family news. This baby was born. Pray for this situation, which is really tough. Just fosters a bit of internal community and care, like you say. I think that's really hard. And what we're very aware of is, because we've got a smaller congregation and a larger one, how we've got to communicate appropriately in each, rather than it's just one method for both.
Yeah, that's really good. So thank you so much for being with us, and I'm feeling very inspired and encouraged by what you've said. There's been some really good stuff. If people want to find you, where can they? What's the link for the podcast? Because it'd be great to share that out.
Yeah, well, you can check out our website, which is bartonchurch.org.uk, or you can find us on YouTube as well. We're at Barton Church Live. Our podcasts, we have a podcast name called Postcards from Antioch, and that's on Spotify, on YouTube. The more recent series are on YouTube. The original ones are just audio. So there are a few ways, and I think we're on Instagram. I'm not. Facebook page. There we go.
Thank you so much.
Yes, okay. Thanks for having
Alice.
me on. It's good to talk about these things that often maybe get overlooked. So good job.
So, welcome, Peter. Really good to have you with us today.
Thanks, Joe. Good to be with you.
You may know that we've got some terribly awkward questions as icebreakers to ask you to get going. So, first of all, what is your favourite biscuit?
Well, it depends what time of the day it is, and it depends what time of the week it is. So
Good.
seen that Peter Kay sketch on hobnob biscuits versus rich tea. I'm a rich tea man in the morning, but come the evening, I like a good hobnob to dunk. And it saturates the coffee. And where it's a chocolate-covered hobnob, the chocolate also is still there to be tasted. So there we are. I'm a rich tea man in the morning and a hobnob man in the evening.
King of biscuits.
Make what you want of
That makes me angry and happy at the same time.
I won't ask why, Hannah.
We'd be here all day talking just about biscuits. Bringing it back to church comms.
Yep.
Social media. Do you have a favourite site that you go to?
Not particularly, no. I mean, I'm across most as an observer. Initially, I was an early adopter. Got a bit burnt by that, really, and so tend to be on accounts for Instagram and Facebook, etc., and just observe and watch. In fact, I find out a lot more about what's going on in Lansdowne by going to the Facebook page than I know myself. So, and there's a couple of guys within the Lansdowne church family social media scene who I am linked to on their posts, and they tell me before anything else, before anyone else, what's happening. So I go to their. So I use social media in that sense. I like to stay across the social media trends, but often pick that up via the news feeds, and then if I see something that's worth following up, like what's the latest silly thing that Elon Musk has said, I will go and go on X or something.
Yeah, if we must call it that. And what about podcasts? Are there any podcasts that you sort of
I
go
quite
to?
like Simon Guillebaud's Be Inspired. I think that's one I go to. Russell Brand, over the years, before his, in quotes, Christian, conversion story, I used to go listen to Russell Brand stuff because I always thought he was an interesting thinker. Crazy lifestyle, but interesting thinker. Jordan Peterson, Douglas Murray, their kind of podcast stuff. Simon Sharma for a bit of history. Tom Holland for the same reason. So I'm a bit eclectic, a bit
quite
broad. I like my sports broadcasts. I like BBC Thought for the Day stuff as well. So I'll often dip
and that's
in
something you've been involved with that in the past, haven't you?
Yeah, quite. I like to listen to the people that I used to work with and see what the BBC is producing across its range now. Yeah, so I'm pretty eclectic, pretty broad.
And the most important question, gourd or pomegranates?
I think pomegranates. If it's the
Simple
choice
as
between the one or the other. I've only looked at a gourd from a distance. I don't think maybe I've handled one or two, but a pomegranate, you can actually get hold of one of those and enjoy it.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Super. So on to the I suppose more topical questions.
Yeah.
So does your church have a vision statement? And if yes, how did that come about? Can you tell us more about it?
Well, interestingly, you should ask this, Hannah, because yesterday one of my trustees emailed me to say, hey, Peter, I'm trying to work out what our vision is in terms of the statements of our vision on the various platforms we use. And so I suspect the answer, Hannah, to the question is yes, we do, but we have several. And some of them have been archived and represent a vision statement from 10, 15 years ago. When I arrived in Lansdowne, what was that, 11 years ago? We've updated or refreshed our vision statement, but I'm not always sure that we've consistently reflected that in all our comms. So that was the question behind my trustee's question. Peter, do you realise that here we say this and there we say that? So if you were to ask me today, August the 8th, what's the vision statement of Lansdowne? It would be the 3 M's: making, maturing, and mobilizing disciples of Jesus Christ. That's our front-facing current, at least I hope that's our front-facing current vision statement.
Yeah.
That's the umbrella under which we sort of wrap everything.
Yeah. And it can be helpful to have a more formal thing, but actually in some senses to just have something that's memorable like that isn't necessarily a vision statement, but is very clearly a vision.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, technically, I don't think it's a vision statement. It would need to be unpacked. And I suspect that underneath those three M's, there would be statements that unpack the vision. But you're right, it's hopefully memorable. And I think it has a reasonably long shelf life. Although, as is the nature of comms nowadays, you're constantly refreshing, reinventing, and looking for angles on new ways of saying the same thing. I mean, we probably discuss it as we go, but this whole thing of redundant communication is more than a mantra, it's a reality.
Yeah.
And in the context in which we serve, a large, dynamically growing, changing church with, front door, back door, you've got to keep repeating the messages, and that includes the vision statement. That we're a church committed to, making, maturing, modeling disciples of Jesus. Somewhere in there, Hannah, there would be for us reference to mission, particularly, and Bible, and community. But if you keep me going for too long, I'll give you several other vision statements that probably would do quite well, but I haven't lined them up. But you'll hear my heart for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So in your experience, how does that heart and that vision translate into action, specifically with the way that a church is communicating?
Yeah, I mean, this is an important area, isn't it, to dig into? And I'm not always sure how to measure the answer or where I go to first for the accurate reading on it. So if I was to try to answer the question, how do we measure whether we're communicating and delivering this vision well? It depends. This sounds like me, prevaricating, but it depends which department, ministry leader you ask the question of, or which area of church life do you drill down into to evaluate, are we really delivering against our vision? So it's always the case, isn't it, that we believe our own publicity if we're not careful, and it becomes a sort of thing you hide behind, and you don't properly evaluate whether you are actually putting some flesh on the bones of that vision. I would say, though, that when it comes to something as not straightforward but as important and strategic as our vision as a church for mission and communicating that, I'd say that in the last several years we've upped the ante on how we do that. In different platforms, not just using the verbal stuff on a Sunday or digital stuff, website posts and things. I just think we're learning to tell. Okay, here's what I think has been happening for us in the last year or so. We've been learning to understand the importance of telling the story or telling the stories in relation to all these vision things. And the story often is best captured in a person or in a journal or in a journey, in a testimony, old language. Not so much in a set of words that are framed in a nice box with good font that's attractive. It's actually letting people tell the story of the vision of the church as it relates to mission, Bible, community, whatever. So I think in answer, kind of in a meandering way to the question, we're trying to work out how to tell our stories more effectively through our communications. So that I think means that, at least I hope it means, that we're changing our journalistic style. Everything has become more informal for a church like ours in the last 5-10 years. Yeah. From what I would call important statements of belief and doctrine, which we haven't lost or thrown away, but we're trying to find ways of stating our truth, our vision, our theology, more informally, more accessibly, I suppose you could say.
And that goes for not just the church from a top-down perspective, but encouraging people to tell those stories to each other as well, right?
You'd like to think so, Joe. I'd like to think, I've always liked to think this, that if you go to the guy who's cleaning out the toilets or whatever, or serving coffee on a Sunday, and say, what does Lansdowne Church stand for? What's it all about? You'd like to think that they've got the vision, that they've understood it, and that if people like that serving in that area of church life understand that what they do contributes ultimately to the building of this mission and ministry, then I'm excited by that. Yeah. So it's not just about people like me who are communicators standing on a platform with a PowerPoint, big screen behind us with, glossy images. It's about so-called ordinary people like that understanding the vision of the church and communicating it in their way.
Yeah. I want to pick up on, you mentioned measuring and how do we measure it? And I think that is not just in terms of how effective communications are, but growth and church growth in general is such a difficult thing to pin down on how do we measure that. I don't know that there are hard and fast rules for this, but is there anything you've discovered in terms of just trying to get a feel for how do we measure the health and the growth of a church? And then as part of that, how does that then feed back into the comms as what we're prioritizing with what we're trying to communicate?
Yeah. I'm thinking just take a step back in a sense to reinforce the value of what folks like you are doing to help what people like me are doing. Communications is increasingly important as a way of expressing our vision and organizing our community and getting people on the same page. So the indexes of health. I think this is the important question, really. What is health in terms of church ministry? And so spiritual health for me is about depth in discipleship. It's about a generous map for the church's mission, vision. So we need a big map, a big heart and a big map. We need to go deep. We need to emphasize much more, I think, in our culture, the relational nature of faith. It's following Jesus. It's becoming like Jesus. It's practicing the way. John Mark Comer. It's beholding, becoming. That isn't language that we use particularly, but I hope that's what we mean by discipleship and health. So I say on a regular basis to Lansdowne, it's all well and good us becoming wide growth that way. We've got to go deep. Otherwise, you end up with the challenge of every church across the continents of being a mile wide and an inch deep. We've got to be much deeper, and I think that relates to all of us who've been on the faith journey over decades, as well as those of us who come to faith fairly recently. So for me, the key index of growth, of spiritual health, is growth in depth of discipleship. I think secondly, I believe an indication of spiritual health is conversion, is transformation, is radical change of lifestyle and values. I think that churches like ours that are blessed with growth, which is often transfer growth or biological growth, within the internal growth of the church, I think we need to be much more passionate about praying for and investing in gospel growth, conversion growth. So just recently we had a baptism at the beach service, and it was a joy to see 7 people being baptized, all under the age of 80, 2 from a New Age background, 5 different nations of the world reflected, all fairly recent converts. And that warms the heart of a pastor. And that's what you want to see on a weekly basis. People, and I think what's happened to us in maybe the last year or two, Joe, is that people are turning up apparently from nowhere, wanting to find faith in Jesus. And then one of the guys who was baptized knocked on the door of the church, the window of the church, as it is now, not the door. We haven't got any doors; it's only windows. And said, "I've been told this is a place where I can come and find faith." It came from nowhere. Yeah. A Muslim background too. So
and yet it's not coming from nowhere. As much as God can bring that about in someone's heart to just go to a place that actually it's also tied into reputation and the long-standing sort of relationships within the community and all that side of things as well.
And our location.
But that's really hard to measure.
Absolutely. And our location is strategic in that sense, in terms of footfall People who are just passing through are part of the demographic, which brings its own challenges in terms of integration. So if you go back to your original and good question, how do you measure growth? What is spiritual health, and how does that shape, influence communication? I think as key communicators, those of us who occupy the platform space, or those of us who are editing the website or writing journalism in various ways, need to keep creatively keep those messages coming through. What health is, what the vision of the church in terms of its aspiration for spiritual growth and depth is. We need to find lots of different ways of saying that, so that it's more than simply it's the right thing to say. It's actually something that we are passionate about, and we communicate on a regular basis. So take this whole concept of telling stories. What we need to do, therefore, as a church, is to, in the best sense, cherry pick the stories that illustrate or communicate the key messages that we want our church to be about. So where is the Spirit of God working in people in such a way that they can tell the story of their coming to faith, not just in a baptismal service, but in other ways too. And I think, Joe, one of the challenges for us is how you capture the stories in the first place.
Yeah.
Because of the nature.
And you had some help with the beach baptisms, didn't you?
We did.
Capturing them?
Yeah, we did. I mean, we were very fortunate to have TBN UK sort of filming the whole thing. And I think it's being broadcast in a couple of weeks' time. But I think that within our internal departments, we need stories being captured and then displayed, communicated. And the stories have to be captured within a reasonable amount of time, because the nature of the world is that a story goes out of date pretty quickly. It's the instant, and there's the danger here that you don't have time to reflect on this story before the next one comes along. But it's certainly an issue for us. How do we archive? How do we capture and then archive these stories and place them in various areas of church life, so for example, you know our lovely modern building, there are lots of screens available for us to be telling the stories of faith on those screens during the week. Why do we wait until Sunday with the latest this or that, when we've got massive opportunity with all the footfall through the cafe and the English conversation classes to be telling the stories of the church? Now, that's not that's hardly a new idea, and other people have said to me, why can't we do this? Well, it takes people like you guys and people like me to put together the content and then to deliver it on a regular basis. But I think it just illustrates what I'm trying to emphasize here, capturing the stories quickly enough that tell and communicate the vision of the church. And there is a time investment in doing those things, but if you know why you're doing it, then it becomes a lot easier to communicate that and justify that investment, doesn't it? Yeah. And I think, and we haven't touched on this, but I think it's worth just reminding ourselves that what the church is trying to do, probably, and not always well, is actually communicate to two very different audiences, and sometimes at the same time, and that is very difficult to do. So take our website. It seems to me that our website is currently undergoing another revision. There's a ghost version in the background that hopefully you'll see the light of day in the next few weeks or months. But essentially, the website that I see at the moment is for internal consumption. It's for those who know their way around and can navigate the life of the church through the various menu options. And that is more likely to happen in a bigger church where there is more going on anyway, isn't it? Yeah. But I think there's an audience out there, and COVID taught us this, that wants to be like Zacchaeus in the tree and have a look, but not come down yet. Window shopping. Yeah. And I think that is an audience that we've yet to work out how we communicate with on various platforms, other than you can always watch us online or live stream the service, that is a good window, a shop window in which to see the community in its active public worship. But I think that we can still be a lot more smart about communicating to the external audience in our bog standard websites. But I think it takes a different kind of journalism again. It takes a different sort of angle, different sort of approach. It's not, you don't use the same language freight. So yeah, that's an issue, isn't it, for us often all the time. What audiences are we communicating to, and how do we shape the message to fit that particular audience?
Yeah. Oh, that's some good questions. I feel like you're kind of half answering some of the stuff that we were going to ask you, and you've kind of touched on this already about having to change formats to adapt to people's changing habits in how we consume content, both as Christians, members within the church, but also as those who haven't yet come through the door, and also things being sort of less polished in how they're being made or being presented to our audiences. Have you got any examples of that sort of within your church as to how you've progressed in your output over the years, over sort of whether that's sort of certain themes that you've shared out, but then also secondary question of then what are the challenges with sharing the things that we want to share out and sort of the things that you've got to think about in what you create?
So I mean, there's a lot there to unpack. I mean, I think on part A of that question, Hannah, there's a balance to be struck between what I call a commitment to excellence at every level of church life, including media and comms, and then what you rightly, and I think it's right to use the word less polished, or that maybe wasn't your word, but more homely. And I think even within contemporary professional communications, there is this move now to what I would call more sort of homespun stuff, more natural stuff,
organic,
less polished stuff.
I think as I've said, polished actually, and you saying excellence, that's what we're very much about. I think actually, I take back the word less polished, more authentic rather than overly produced, and you are losing that authenticity to who we are as humans, really.
Yeah, and I think this is a very important area to explore at every level of our communications, because the tendency, I think, because of the cultural zeitgeist, because of the context in which we operate, with the media being so significant, so important, and so influential, is that we tend to imagine that if we can't produce it, top dollar production, we can't produce it. And while I'm committed to the excellence journey, because I do think Christians in particular, certainly from my church background and culture, have not been sufficiently investing in the development of professional, polished communications. I don't want that to happen, and then we lose what you call the authenticity and the naturalness, and if you like, the normalness of our faith and our community. So it's not either or, is it? It's both and. It's working at improving the way we communicate, how we communicate, but not losing the basic core values of our church, which will be different from church to church. And I think authenticity in communication is being who you are, but doing that more effectively, which might mean, encouraging people's development as communicators or writers or whatever. But it's being who you are, not being what you're not. And that's partly a journey of self-discovery, which means you need to be secure, because the local church can't compete with, mega productions. And that actually applies to mega church productions. You go to Hillsong, etc., and it's extraordinary. HTB likewise, the investment they make in their camera work, in all of that. So I think there's a balance to be struck between improvement and the journey of not losing authenticity as a consequence of that. And then, Hannah, what was part B of the question? Which now I've forgotten.
What are the challenges with, I suppose, what are the challenges with reaching the people that we need to be reaching, so those people who haven't come through the doors yet, but balancing that sort of commitment to excellence without putting them off, using the Christianese that really can be quite terrifying for people. Yeah. But actually, I suppose, as well, if we're all creating a lot of content now, suddenly we're competing with just a lot more noise. in the space.
We are. And I think sometimes we overplay the media angle on a Sunday, because it's almost like we're still discovering, the best toy we've had for Christmas, sort of thing, and we overuse it as a consequence. And
it can be easier to do that rather than have to get into nitty gritty of a personal conversation with someone sometimes as well.
It can be. So I think that in terms of the structure of the service, as the question is about the challenges of all of this, in terms of the structures of a service, Sunday service, we've got to look carefully, monitoring carefully, how much time do we spend doing this, that, or the other? What do we give our prime time to? So there's an argument on the staff that's been, a positive argument about video notices, the good, the bad, the ugly, because in some ways, quality video notices do that job of communications about certain things so much better than a rambling verbal notice given by somebody who is just reading off a bit of paper, just having been handed it before the service starts. You know what I mean? So if you get well-prepared video notices that don't dominate, but actually help to communicate what needs to be communicated, I think that's a plus. But the danger is then, if you're not careful, that everything else in the service is also quite media-driven or media-saturated. So for me, that's one of the challenges. There is another challenge, Hannah, which relates to how we communicate to the multiple audiences within the congregation on a Sunday anyway. So even, I'm a preacher, I'm an expositor, I teach the Bible. That's, in a sense, that's all I can do. And I do it in a certain kind of way. And I do it probably with my target audience being believers. Okay, I'm not by nature somebody who's an evangelist who uses the Bible to basically, bring people to Christ. Now, we thank God that happens through expository ministry, but the style of my ministry, if you like, it does not. When I sit down to prepare the talk, I'm not thinking about unconverted Joe or Mary. I hope I am in some ways. I hope my language is not going to be so cliched and so sort of in-house that they feel alienated. But my primary audience, as I look out at Lansdowne on a Sunday morning, is to the Christian believers there. Now, I'm a great believer in the power of the Spirit, that the word that is preached is a word for everyone. But I do also appreciate, therefore, the challenge that in a number of cases and across a number of services, that, if you like, that other demographic in the local church, the non-Christian seeker, isn't being directly helped or targeted in the same way that you could argue that now in Lansdowne we're a very multicultural international church. You could argue that it actually makes the job of the preacher doing 35 minutes on a Sunday from, we're doing Ruth, the book of Ruth at the moment, makes it all the more difficult to land it well for all those different cultures in the church, where your primary, if you like, audience is your white middle class European. So that's another challenge, how we communicate to multiple audiences within the same context, and I think as well, how do we reflect our growing diversity as a church, given what I've just said about the different internationals, the seekers, the asylum refugees that we have coming on to us? How do we reflect that diversity in the life of the church? This isn't a question about communications per se. It's a question about how we are a church, how we are a community together. And interestingly, in the next 4 weeks, we've got the first ever, as far as I'm aware, international music night, a worship night. And that's, I've deliberately set that up, working with some of the African leaders we've got in the church now, who will take charge of it. It'll be for all the nations, but it'll be the Nigerians who basically drive the music, worship style and content. But I think that's an attempt to answer the challenge of how we can be this community of authentic but different cultures. I think, though, when you then ask the question, to overlay on that, how do you communicate all of that out? I'm still wrestling with that. And let me define the question. How do I discern what are the key messages at any given Sunday or any given week or any given month? And how do we know that those messages, those communiques, those posts have been understood or have been taken on board? Now, you could argue, well, you'll see that because you get more money in the offering bag, or you'll get more people becoming members, or you'll get more people coming to the church, or whatever. But it is a question for me that I wrestle with more and more, because we are, as a church, doing more and more, because we have many more things going on, many more stories to tell, many more projects to get involved in, and it's all exciting stuff. I know some people are kind of in danger of just switching off. It's too much being shared, too much being communicated, too much happening here. Or they want to live in the echo chamber of their communications world, where they're really only hearing what they need to hear or want to hear, and they switch off when we're talking about our seniors ministry or our student ministry. Well, that's not my thing. My thing is, this. So I think that becomes a challenge. I think it's always a challenge. What is it you communicate? How often you communicate it? And do you allow for this inevitable filtering going on? Or do you sort of do you force feed people? Do you cut out all other communications on messages other than the key messages? And I haven't. And I'm working that out.
It's an ongoing question, isn't it? Because it's going to change, and that's the point of it. Yeah. So you mentioned the importance of going deep as well as wide, and I think this is maybe part of that, perhaps related to sort of measuring even the spiritual health of the people who are joining the church and that growth. How easy are you finding it right now to recruit volunteers, and not just for comms, for wider ministry as well?
With difficulty. I think there is an increasing, as we know, cultural pressure on people in the work context. Therefore, church, if you like, and church service, we may want to debate the distribution of people's values here, but it's certainly, as I look at it, the church is like one spoke on the hub of people's lives. It isn't the hub, sadly, around which all of the rest of their lives work. So the church thing is one spoke, like the tennis club or the children's homework, or visiting, friends from university. The church has to compete as one spoke on many of the hub of people's time, of people's energy. And so the volunteer base of the church, I think, is always in danger of being eroded to the point where you can't sustain what you have been doing. Add to that, in our context, we are doing more now, different things than we were even 2 years ago.
You spread more thinly anyway.
You're needing more volunteers.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, I think this is a cultural change, which has been happening for a generation at least. People are happy to sign up for a rota where they're on duty, if you like, volunteering once a month. But you try to get people to serve once a week in any area of church life, and you find it very difficult. So we've even discussed having voluntary contracts, because there's such a flakiness sometimes. Now, there are many wonderful people who love Jesus and are serving the kingdom faithfully without payment. I mean, I'm paid to do this kind of thing, you know what I mean? But there are loads of people. And Lansdowne, like every church, is an army that marches by its volunteers. So there are loads of brilliant examples, but increasingly there's a flakiness about the voluntary culture that makes it very difficult for us to recruit and retain people. And I'm not sure what the answer is. You do less? Is that an answer? I mean, some would say that, we're trying to do too much. Let's do a few things really well as opposed to a lot of things in a mediocre way.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Need to reflect on that myself.
So I mean, I would, as a strategic, leader in that sense, what I would need to be doing regularly, and I think I do this, is look at what our key targets are, what we believe our goals are for the year, and then say, okay, if we're going to hit that target, what's our investment needed resource-wise? And of that resource investment, what is financial, what is relational, what is people? And therefore we work recruitment into those areas. The difficulty we've got in a local church that is now 160 years old, or whatever it is, you've got this sort of inherited tradition of things that we've always done. And it's a bit like the flower, no longer a problem for Lansdowne, but it used to be the battle. Who's going to do the flower rota this week? Well, fortunately, we've lost that particular, issue, but we've gained other ones, and people just don't want to see their ministry, stop. So you have to keep turning the volunteer handle, and it is quite tiring.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And so that's sort of like where we started with vision. Going on to then, where are we investing in terms of events and ministries? How do we recruit around that? And then that's all before we get to how do we actually communicate that out as well. Yeah,
absolutely. But I would say though that if I'm prioritizing, which is what the language you're using at the moment, if I'm prioritizing stuff, then I have increasingly, I hope, delivered on the priority of investing in communication. Because you can have, all the great things going on in the life of the local church, but if you don't capture those stories and tell them well and creatively, then in some senses you're not blessing everyone. So for me, the continuing investment and improvement of our comms is a key priority because of the outcome that you would like, the dividend that you'd like to see coming from clear, effective communications, whether that's print media or digital media. I think these are just such important elements of the church's life. There was a phrase, wasn't there, coming out of COVID, that we've got to be clicks and bricks. We've got to be in person, and we've got to be digital. So I think Lansdowne, as you would know, Joe, had a degree of a head start in terms of the sort of streaming of services, but we've improved since then, and we've got to carry on improving. But it's clicks and bricks, so there needs to be, if you like, a place to come, a place to hang out, a community to belong to physically. But there's also this digital community and the communications into that the clicks that we need to be also investing in.
Yeah, no, that's so good. So to round us off, can you share any specific stories of encouragement from your digital outputs and communications? What have been fruit from your churches, or even sort of personal investment in communications?
Yeah, and I think one of the stories out of COVID, it's a long time ago now in one sense, but actually it's only 3 or 4 years ago, was that we all overnight had to flex to be a much more digital, community. And one of the amazing things that we found very soon was that we just put on online Bible study, and we found ourselves, on the call with people from closed access countries, and Africa and Latin America, and that's just one example of the COVID era. Subsequently, and in the last 2 years, I'd say some of the encouraging stories for me. I referred to one earlier, the baptism on the beach, and the kinds of people that were being baptized. I think another one, right in the cultural moment now, is our work amongst asylum seekers. So we've begun English conversation classes. Now there's a communications exercise, if you like. And in that group we have people from Eritrea, Sudan, Middle East, Iran, an extraordinary. We have a beginner's level, an intermediate level, an advanced level. Now all of that has happened in the last year. And we have baptized 29 Iranians in the last calendar year. 29.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So that obviously to a church leader and to a church community is wonderfully encouraging, and I think it reflects what we now describe as the new Lansdowne. We have 120 Africans who belong to the church. I have a girl called Afi who's actually got a background in broadcasting in Nigeria, who on her own WhatsApp program has 80 Nigerians who come to Lansdowne, and she's one of the drivers of this international music worship night in a few weeks' time. So that is an encouragement. The cultural diversity, also I think the demographic diversity of Lansdowne. I mean, we've always had the In Touch, soup kitchen ministry to the homeless, but the location of the church where it is in the town centre, and the style of the church building, which is windows, in and out, you can see in and out. I think we're just picking up constantly people off the streets who are part of a marginalised community. We started in the last 6 months to a year a Believers in Recovery group for women with addictions on a Tuesday night. It's just extraordinary, the kind of the overlapping ministries that are about the lost, the least, the lost. The marginalised, the powerless, the voiceless. And I think that is changing the spirituality and maybe the kind of, certainly the landscape of Lansdowne, and maybe it will eventually begin to significantly influence the strategic longer-term vision of Lansdowne. We've got the last thing I'd say, by way of encouragement, is our School for Discipleship, which launches for the first time properly in 3 or 4 weeks. I met with the director, Chris Ingerson, yesterday just to catch up, and we've got a cohort of interns. You remember, Joe, you were an intern. We've got about 5 or 6 interns now coming to the SFD program. We've got about 25 in the study program. We've got an even larger number of people who are accessing the course in other ways. And all of that is going to be happening out of Woodbury Avenue, which is where I wanted to land with the fine encouragement. For me, Woodbury Avenue, which is our second site, Hannah, has been mothballed for the last 2 or 3 years post-COVID. Not entirely mothballed, but things have been happening there still. But it's always been one of the things, for me, of an unfinished agenda. And and we've thought about how we could use the building, whether we sell it on, whether we give it to a church. And back in January this year, I felt very strongly in my heart that we needed to hold on to it and invest in it. And what School for Discipleship is doing is helping us put Woodbury Avenue back on the map, because it'll be there that S for D and the church training and church planting initiative begins to grow. So I'm thrilled and excited at that prospect, and I think it's the most recent and for this program's sake, the last thing I want to say by way of a story of encouragement, really.
Yeah. It's so, in a way, it's frustrating talking to you, Peter, because everything you say is so fascinating that we can pick at any one of those threads and we could go on for a tangent and have a whole series of podcasts. So thank you so much for joining us today. If people want to find you online, or indeed if they want to find Lansdowne or the School for Discipleship, how can people do that?
Well, usual channels, I guess. lansdownechurch.co.uk, go to our website. You can always hook up with me via my email address, peter.baker@lansdownechurch.uk. People can go onto our website and see the archive stuff, live stream. Yeah, it's the usual. It's the usual kind of saturation of media. I think it depends what people really want to find out. If you want to get a feel of Lansdowne, then the best thing to do is to join a live stream service or catch up on our YouTube channel afterwards. I think, though, look out for this. This is my prayer. You might want to pray for me, for us on this. In the next few months, I'm hoping that our website will give a much quicker and immediate window into the authentic storytelling of the community that is Lansdowne Church. So it's for me, okay, this is me to you, Joe and Hannah. At the moment, it's quite a static opening page. I want to see a bit of life and a bit of movement, a bit of story, a bit of human authenticity there, not just text. But that's so. Hopefully, if people want to, find out a bit more about Lansdowne in the next few months, our website hopefully will begin to allow those windows in.
Yeah. I will look forward to it. Peter, thanks so much for joining us today.
Been great.
Thank
Been
you.
great.
I think you'll agree that was some pretty incredible stuff from those guys and some amazing insights into their contexts, really.
Yeah, for sure. I've certainly been taking notes and getting some ideas that we can use in our church.
Yeah. Well, feel free to go back and listen again and again. And if you found that episode helpful, do share with anyone else that you know.
Yeah, that makes a real difference. And we don't mention it very often, but we do have a Buy Me a Coffee link where you can donate towards the podcast, and that helps us to continue making it and obviously to keep sharing all these amazing comms tips and strategies with churches in the UK.
Yeah. Next week's episode is all about recruiting and equipping comms volunteers, so come back for that. And then we have a bit of a bonus episode hearing more about Kingdom Code. So we'll see you soon.